All right, so continuing on, we just went through this one. Another 55 word, well, a 55 word example. These can have really very different moods to them. So this one is a much more serious mood to it. And this one's a really good example of how concise can you be and still tell a pretty detailed story. So here's this one. Snapped ankle, out of coma, amnesia. Every day goes by the same. The doctors come in and ask hundreds of questions. That social worker won't leave me alone. Today, a tall man with my high cheekbones, wearing a blue jacket, comes in to see me. Tess? Then I see his cold eyes, and I remember. Okay, so even in 55 word, we are telling a story, but it's still somewhat open-ended. You're left with questions, but it tells a story. And again, I mean, just take a look at how concise this is. I mean, you don't have to say, I have amnesia, or the patient seems to have amnesia. They simply wrote amnesia. And there wasn't any confusion as to what was going on there or who they were referring to or anything like that. So it's really cool just to see how concise you really can be and still communicate what you need to communicate without using an entire sentence. Another example. Don's parents said he'd never amount to anything. They said he'd never be successful, but here he was, sitting in the lap of luxury. The house had magnificently tall ceilings and elaborate art on the walls that Don admired. He took them down and threw them in the truck with the rest of the plunder. Okay, so that one has a twist at the end of it. You don't necessarily see where it's going, and then all of a sudden there's this twist. So that's, again, very characteristic of flash fiction. Another 55 word example. Two foes faced one another on a desert battlefield. Sweat beaded both brows, one infamous clothed in black, the other a golden star over his heart. They drew revolvers. Gunshots sounded. A woman yelled from a nearby porch. The combatants fell and lay still. Then, rising, they began to sprint towards the porch. Snack time. So again, a really great twist at the end. You maybe saw it coming, you maybe didn't. But a good example of a twist at the end. These are some longer examples, so they still are considered flash fiction because they're very, very short stories. But you can read those on your own. I would suggest reading all three of them. They all have very different moods to them and tell the stories in really short ways. One of the things that you're going to notice in Snow, for example, as you're reading along, you learn about the background of the character and where she's from, and what her experiences were there and how she's transitioning to her new life. Girl, as you read, as you go along, it's entirely one person speaking to this girl, and she replies a couple times, but mostly it's one person speaking, and it tells a whole story just from this one person basically giving this big speech. And then the haircut is really interesting. It's probably my favorite out of these three, just because you learn about the relationship between these two people as the story goes along. And you'll notice in all three of these just techniques that you can use to gradually drop in details of the backstory without having to actually go through the entire backstory before you can tell the real story. So those are really good examples to go through. Please read those on your own. They'll be really helpful to you. Finally, as far as your assignment goes, refer to the Flash Fiction and Short Story Guide sheet on Classroom. That'll give you all of your assignment instructions for exactly what you're going to be writing and the due dates for those. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions.